All right, everyone, welcome back to Mysterious Planet. We have another awesome guest with us today. He is an international explorer, archaeologist, and author who has traveled the globe to uncover mysteries of ancient times. His expeditions ranging from the Amazon rainforest to the bottom of the sea. Please welcome Jonathan Gray. Jonathan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jake. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. All right, so first off, could you go into detail about how you first got into archaeology?
Well, I guess it came in quite accidentally. I went down to the Amazon, which was an adventure really more than anything at the time, into the headwaters over the Andes Mountains, into the unexplored headwaters of eastern Ecuador bordering into Peru and Brazil. And although they claim territory, the three countries on the map, there's an area that was off the map in the middle there, and I went right into that area to explore what might be there. And I lived eventually among tribes that were still head shrinking and killing one another with poison darts and blowpipes. And in the 3 months before I went in, I found out later 100 people had been murdered in the paybacks of one tribe against another in the area that I was in. Before going down to South America, however, I had taken the precaution of learning as much as I could about this part of the world, and it seemed a wise move to start with that I should buy a bulletproof vest at a police disposal store in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so I took that with me just in case. You never know what's coming against you.
Absolutely.
And fortunately, I was given a head start by General Pico of the Ecuadorian Army. General Pico used to be a ambassador to Great Britain from Ecuador, but now he was in charge of the Ecuador Army. And by the way, the Ecuador Army was stationed in little outposts, little clearings in the jungle here and there, dropping out of the skies to place their little clearings. And the reason for this was they were claiming territory which they knew was under dispute with other countries bordering them. And so by positioning their outposts in this area, it gave them more or less a right that, okay, it's ours because we're living here. And once a week, General Pico had to fly in provisions to all these little outposts, one after another, that were scattered through the jungle, where they had dropped out of the sky and they had cleared away a little bit of trees, and then they'd set up an army camp. And fortunately, I met up with General Pico, and he offered to take me in as far as his planes would go, and that would save me weeks and weeks and weeks of tramping, because that would cover hundreds of square miles that otherwise would have to be done the hard way on foot. And I recall the first army compound that I was flown into, General Pico got out of the plane, and there was a guard of honour already stationed, about 100 soldiers waiting for him, and he walked through, and I just trotted along behind the guard with the guard of honour. And I was given a week's accommodation there in that army clearing, while they sent soldiers in to nearby villages to try to get carriers for me, carriers that would take the heavy stuff that I needed to go. And so after about a week there in that clearing, the carriers came back, brought by the soldiers, and these carriers, of course, were just savages. They were murderers, probably most of them. They'd killed somebody in their lifetime, and now they were going to be in charge of looking after me. So just as a matter of insurance, I had already bought in Quito a few little things that I knew would be of help and prized by these natives, such as fish hooks and brightly coloured cloth, and little handheld mirrors, and one or two little pocket torches and things like that. And I laid these all out on the floor when they were brought into the army compound, these natives. And I said, now, through an interpreter, because I couldn't speak their language, nor could they speak English.
Right.
And through the interpreter being one of the soldiers who could speak Spanish only, what I had to do was I bought a 1 cubic inch Spanish-English dictionary. And in that were all the survival words that would be necessary if you were Spanish trying to speak English, and if you were English trying to speak Spanish. And eventually, through using this and the interpreter, I gave these natives a eyeful of what I had waiting for them here, all these brightly coloured things and status symbol items which they would be in the eyes of their fellows back home. And I said, you bring me back safely, and these will be here waiting for you. This will be your prize. I was not going to give them to them first because I wasn't certain that I'd come out again.
Right.
If they got these as a promise, that would be a good incentive for them to do their job and get me back safely when I was finished. So anyway, when I got into these areas, it was mostly walking. If I realised it was mostly walking, probably I wouldn't have done it, but it was okay. It turned out okay. Very little boat riding. That's what I had expected, but it wasn't so. We just crossed rivers by walking, wading through up to our waist in these, and hope there were no piranhas in the water. We make a big noise first. We're in the water with stones and things, and hopefully chase away any dangerous things, and then go across the water. And what I did was I took with me one of the soldiers who was given me by the Ecuadorian government as a protection, and he was the only one that carried a weapon. And two native carriers, who could speak the language of the tribes around, and also the soldier had once been one of those natives who was now educated, and he could speak both their language and Spanish. And so my job was to communicate with the soldier, and then he would, communication was not easy, of course. We'd walk all day, and then we'd come down to settle at night, and that would be when our conversation took place. And to get one question answered would take about half an hour. To ask the question, then get it answered. Perhaps I should explain that. The question I might have would be, they'd rattle off something and point to something, and I wouldn't know what it was. So I'd then look up my English-Spanish dictionary, and I would look up words like, what was that? And then try to pronounce it correctly in Spanish, and then wait for him to give me an answer, and he'd rattle off some big, long, fast answer, and I couldn't understand him, so I would then have to look up the dictionary and say, could you speak slower, in his Spanish, hoping that my accent was understandable. Then he would speak slower, and then I would think, now how do you spell what he has just said? Those sounds, how would I spell them in the Spanish part of the dictionary, so that I can understand what they are in English? And so after one question, it would take half an hour to get an answer and understand it. Then come the next question, and we had lots of laughs, lots of fun trying to understand each other. So anyway, that was survival. And these natives were very, very smart. Each day, at the end of the day, they would say things that they had pointed to during the day, which had not been understood by me, and we'd get an update. For example, yesterday a jaguar came past here before sunset at this spot, and it had a baby with it. Now, how on earth, without seeing the jaguar and seeing the baby and seeing the time, could they ever work that out? But these natives knew what the signs were in nature, and they could tell what had been through that area, and whether there was a baby with the mother or the mother was on her own, and so on. Amazing, just how clever they were.
Absolutely.
So anyway, my time spent in those villages was really awesome, and it was possible eventually to make friends with these people, and I was shown things which I never knew about before. Here in one of these native villages where they've never been to civilization, never seen a city, never met anyone before like me, except their own people who've become soldiers in the army. Never met an outsider. It was just as though I was stepping from another planet into their midst, and I was as much awed by what I learned as what they were when they saw me. And in any case, they gave me or lent me to hold a metal plate. And this metal plate had Egyptian hieroglyphics on it. And their ancestors had received it from people that wrote on this metal plate. And immediately this twigged with me. I said to myself, this means that the Egyptians visited the Amazon long, long ago. There was no other conclusion, but I had to be sure, of course, but I was pretty sure, but I had to go and get evidence if this was going to be given to the world. And then they told me that their ancestors, long, long ago, lived in shining cities where the lights never went out at night. Now, these people they'd never seen a city. They didn't know what a shining city was. They didn't know about lights that never go out at night, because the only lights they get is from the fire that they have. And so these things began to spark my interest in the past. And when I came out of the jungle, ultimately, I went on a journey, a search to see if there was any confirmation that could be gathered that would show how these people's claims had any truth in them. Or were they just making it up out of their imagination? Because they had not been to civilization. And if their ancestors lived in great shining cities, it means that natives today are the survivors of lost races that have been very civilized in the past. And this is very different from what we're taught in the schools.
Absolutely.
So my search eventually would take me to about 35 countries around the world, and there I would go searching for patterns. Now, was there a pattern in the past of ever burning lights in ancient cities? Was there a pattern of ancient travel where the old world, including Egypt, had been to the new world of the Americans in the past? Because history, as we're taught it today, is that Christopher Columbus was the person who first came from the old world to the new, and that before that the Americas were not known. That's what we're taught. Okay, so there was a lot of things that I had to sort out in my mind. But clearly enough, eventually the evidence came out. In Egypt, I found stories of ancient cities where the lights never went out. Up in Syria and Turkey, the same story. Over in the Mariana Islands of the Western Pacific, the same story. And then I came across a report by explorers in Irian Jaya, that's part of Indonesia. And these explorers had gone into the jungle area and they had sat down, this is in our day, they had sat down and made their camp in the jungle during the night against some old stone ruins that they saw, wondering how ever could these ruins have existed here in an unexplored, unspoilt jungle of eastern Indonesia, Irian Jaya. And lo and behold, as they began to lie down to sleep, as the darkness came on, suddenly there was a glow above them. And they looked, and on about a 20-foot pole, a stone or concrete, a pillar, way on the top of it was a circular globe-like, shaped like a globe structure, and it was glowing with light. And then as they looked further, they saw there was a whole line of them, like an ancient street of street lights. And these were automatically visible at night because they were shedding light into the darkness. Of course, in the daytime you wouldn't notice them, but it was only when they got dark that they saw that these lights were ever burning.
Right.
And this was a civilization that had passed away long ago.
Right.
And they reported it in a town planning conference in Pretoria, South Africa, and that's how I got to hear about it. So here was a pattern of ever-burning lights and a pattern of ancient cities that had high technology. And then I went exploring elsewhere to see evidence of ancient travel. And it was true that not only was there ancient travel, but the entire globe, our spherical Earth, was mapped totally as a spherical Earth with longitude and latitude, including Antarctica. And Antarctica was not confirmed. Captain Cook in 1769, when he set sail from Britain, was given the job of proving whether that legendary place did exist. So it was not confirmed before his visit. And that's only just over 200 years ago. And yet here, with these ancient maps going back about 4,000 years, which included Antarctica and included the whole world, Australia, New Zealand, on the maps, and these were explored and mapped. And so it was not out of possibility for the Amazon in the continent of South America to have been reached by Egyptians back in those early days. What a discovery.
Absolutely. I've actually heard of this before. I believe it was a Graham Hancock lecture that I was listening to where he displayed these ancient source maps that mapped out Antarctica and multiple ones as well. Not just one, but many of these ancient maps that mapped out Antarctica well before we consider to be the discovery of the mainstream discovery of Antarctica to our modern world. Does this evidence suggest then that ancient Egyptians, they were clearly, more advanced than we thought they were? They clearly were a seafaring civilization if some of their ancient artifacts showed up in the Amazon rainforests and they were able to map out Antarctica.
Oh yes, and it was not only back there, but it's been going on through history. I noticed that in both Australia and New Zealand there are, well, first of all, let me go back to Egypt. In Egypt, in the time of Ptolemy, I think it was Ptolemy III, that round about 300 BC, and that's a long time after the others had mapped the world, there was a ship sent from Egypt to circumnavigate the globe. And its captain was a man called Maui, and its navigator was a man called Rata. And they left traces of their journey in Indonesia and in other islands such as Samoa, and then over in South America, the western coast at Chile. But however, because of the long coastline of South America, apparently some of the knowledge had got lost, so this was really just a rediscovery. They gave up their circumnavigation plans, and about halfway down the coast of Chile turned around and came back, and they left evidence of that in a written record in a cave in Chile. And then on the way back, it's either on the way there or else on the way back, they dropped in at New Zealand and Australia and left Ptolemy III coins. And these coins prove that the Egyptians, somebody from Egypt, had been here in the time of Ptolemy, about 300 years BC. That's
incredible.
So, yeah, and the New Zealand, the Maori legend of Maui having fished up to the North Island of New Zealand, Te Ika a Maui, is not just a legend then. Maui was actually an Egyptian navigator, Egyptian captain of a boat. Then Rata was his navigator, and Rata is a New Zealand vine now. So the names are stuck here in New Zealand as the Maoris took on the name that had been left behind.
Right. There's other similar pieces of evidence to this. It doesn't seem to only have been the Egyptians that were seafaring civilizations back in a time when most mainstream archaeologists would say that there weren't seafaring civilizations. I don't know if you've ever heard of the hypothesis of Africans in the Olmec civilization, that the Olmec statues and masks seem to exhibit African features.
Yes, that's right. And of course, not the Polynesian, the Melanesian people of the Western Pacific also claim that they came from Africa. So the Africans explored into the Pacific.
Wow, that's incredible, and very different from what we learn in the history classroom in public schools. I would say.
Yes. And the Phoenicians also came over here. In the biblical books of the Old Testament, King Solomon is said to have sent ships. He had an alliance with the Phoenicians, and together they explored and traded across to a place called Ophir. Now, Ophir, there's only one place in the whole world where outside the Bible the name Ophir is mentioned, and that is the remains of an ancient city at the mouth of the Amazon in South America. And the interesting thing is the native people called their river the River of Solomon. From the non-biblical perspective of the natives of South America, their story matches up from their angle with what the Bible speaks about Solomon going to the ends of the earth and his ships being away for 3 years.
Right. Absolutely. So, after looking into your work, I read some really interesting stuff about the discoveries you made concerning technology that ancient civilizations utilized, and it's technology that we wouldn't normally associate with ancient people. Could you go into detail about some of these discoveries, and what type of picture of the ancient world do these discoveries paint?
Okay, very good. Well, now, today we have bronze instruments, and that bronze is a hard alloy made of copper with the addition of 1/10 part tin. And the early Chinese, as well as the inhabitants of the Middle East, knew how to harden bronze to the strength of high-grade steel. Now, that's harder than we can produce. We still do not understand that technique. They produced iron that will not corrode or rust. They produced enormous castings of pure iron. We can't do that. They made alloys that we have not yet discovered how to do, and hardening copper by an undiscovered process. They had a process for softening hard rock. Now this is an interesting one. They drilled holes which were, when you drill a hole, you do it by the drill going down and making a circular motion all the way down. Well, they did it, and still, while they were drilling the hole remains 5-point star shaped all the way through from one side of the rock to the other. A 5-point star, not a round drill, but it was drilled down just the same. And how they did that, we have not been able to replicate. And some of these stones with the 5-point drill holes in them have been found off Florida and used in the construction of a modern jetty. But the intriguing feature of these blocks is that some of them had already been drilled through, and the drill holes still remain and can be seen today. And through granite, by the way. And granite wears expensive diamond drill bits down to nothing very quickly, but these were drilled through granite. And in Egypt, Egyptologist Sir William Flinders Petrie, he was honest enough to admit that he was puzzled by certain granite drill cores that he had found in ancient Egypt. And the amount of pressure shown with the rapidity with which the drills pierce through the hard stone is very surprising. And he said that this needs to be examined by drill experts. And now they have. They've examined them, and they've declared that the drills in Egypt turn 500 times faster than our fastest modern drills today.
That's incredible. I mean, it's amazing when you talk about what these ancient people so long ago achieved. I mean, how do you think our modern civilization would even fare as far as, like building a pyramid, for instance? The pyramids of Giza are something that have amazed me for so long. How would our modern civilization fare if we tried to build a pyramid?
Well, it has been admitted by construction experts that we could not build the Great Pyramid of Egypt today, not with our technology.
That's incredible. So there's obviously, these ancient civilizations are obviously much more advanced than we thought then.
Oh, yes. And not only that, they had interlocking tunnels, thousands of miles in length, under land and sea. Some of these have been explored. Neil Armstrong, astronaut Neil Armstrong, joined another gentleman by the name of Hall, and they explored a tunnel system in ancient Ecuador, and they were underground for 2 months. And they said that the technology was absolutely incredible, and it was not something that they could just go down and have a cursory look. They wanted to find out more, and they found ancient technology remains in it.
That's incredible. And there's similar caverns in Peru.
Yes, in Peru. There's one in Peru that you go down through these doorways to the level where the tunnel is, and the tunnel goes right westward toward the sea, and then eventually it goes under the sea. And at that particular point where it goes under the sea, it's been flooded. Damage has taken place higher up out at the sea, and the water has come in, and you can't go any further. But the tunnel continues even though you can't proceed with it.
That's incredible. There's some of these under the Sphinx as well, aren't there?
Yes, that's right, under the Sphinx. In fact, there are tunnels honeycombing below Egypt everywhere just about. I've been down into one of them, and it's amazing. These were not done by crude people who were hammering away with hammers.
Right.
These were done with technology that was very rapid and very sophisticated.
Now, have the ones below the Sphinx, have those been explored?
Not all of them, no. But there are rumours of a great labyrinth under there, which goes and connects with other tunnels hundreds of miles away.
And what did the ancient Egyptians use these labyrinths for? Do we know, or can we speculate on it?
Well, I prefer not to speculate, Jake, but I don't think we know enough. We can guess, but our guess is limited to our technology and how much we know. But the only thing that would come nearer the truth would be if we start reading their old reports, and we just have to take their word.
Right. While we're on the topic of the Sphinx, I know there's been some debate surrounding the age of the Sphinx as of recent, particularly due to research conducted by Graham Hancock and a world-renowned geologist whose name escapes me at the moment, but they did research where they studied the erosion around the Sphinx, and they said this type of water erosion around the rock of the Sphinx could not have taken place 4,000 years ago. You need to go back farther than that, possibly back to the last ice age to get that kind of water erosion. What are your thoughts on the age of the Sphinx?
I believe we have plenty of evidence now that the age of the Sphinx is no older than the age of the pyramids, and that the pyramids are no older than about 4,000 years. In fact, just recently, a diary of the foreman who was in charge of the job has now been found. It was found in the Sinai Peninsula, and he records a day-by-day process by which they got the rocks, transported them to Giza, and then built the pyramid. And he records that it happened. He was the master who was in charge of the job. Now, we never expected to find such a diary, but this diary now is readable. It's available to the world, and it coincides with our knowledge of how the Egyptians did things back in the early days. He describes things that we are now finding they could only have been done that way, and the chronology he gives actually takes us back no further than 4,000 years. So there is a diary as a witness, day-by-day report. month by month, week by week, showing us the whole procedure and even where the stone came from, a quarry in the Sinai Peninsula.
While we're talking about ancient civilizations and ancient technology, I wanted to get your insight into the whole ancient aliens hypothesis. It seems to gain more popularity every day. I mean, the History Channel seems to think it's credible enough to do an entire show on. What is your view on the ancient aliens question and its correlation to the advanced ancient technology that's been discovered?
Yes, that's a very interesting subject. We've been taught the evolutionary theory in school that early man struggled for endless millions of years as a primitive and dumb and stupid creature, unable to accomplishing anything on his own, and then lo and behold, quite suddenly, in just a few thousand years, suddenly he has a technology so intricate, so sophisticated, that it suggests that he must have been intelligent from the start and not dumb. Oh, hold on, you have to be smart, there's something wrong here, because we're told that man was dumb for millions of years, so how could he suddenly have this technology? And so faced with this new evidence of high technology in ancient times, and realising man could not have suddenly, after millions of years, suddenly become smart on his own, after evolving from nothing, the man, his name was von Däniken. He's the one that first popularised the idea that maybe visitors from other galaxies were responsible, and that these aliens crossbred with primates to produce modern man and then left behind artefacts for their visit. Well, now that's an interesting theory. It does sort of raise the mind a little bit. But there are certain things of which we can be sure. Firstly, none of the out-of-place artefacts is composed of material off the earth. It's all known to be earthly material for a start. So they didn't leave behind something from other worlds. So that you can forget that one. The technical, logical makeup of the ancient world conforms to the development of our own modern civilization. And the interbreeding problem, of course, we've got to face that. The laws of genetics don't permit it.
Right.
And, of course, if the genetics did match, then that would mean that we were closely related to those aliens, and so man would already be intelligent before the aliens came. And then that removes the origin of intelligence from this planet to another planet, so you still have to account for civilizations on two worlds now instead of one. And you still have to find out how the first began. Now, if evolution could not have done it on this planet and needed alien help, it's equally impossible that evolution could have happened on another planet. Now, there are memories of gods from the skies among primitive people, and these are quite explainable when we go back to Second World War. People in Papua New Guinea, who became known as the cargo cultists. They saw planes coming out of the sky and they said that God stepped out of them and gave them their knowledge. Well, that's how you can explain anything. People who did not have civilization, who'd had to go bush because of disaster, suddenly saw people coming from the skies who had survived, and they then thought they were gods. So that story doesn't prove anything. But there's one point, however, that is provable, that we can go as far as the evidence, and that is that human intelligence is not the product of chance evolution. Man did appear suddenly at the top, not at the bottom. And he's been given the gift of language, the most amazing intellect, and a feeling for handcrafts and technology. And mankind, the human brain, your brain, Jake, and mine, is far more complex than the most complex, deliberately engineered computer. It's not something that could happen by chance. And this idea of gods coming from the skies or extraterrestrials coming to the Earth. This was later on promoted by another man called Sitchin. And he publicised it further. And so people were sending me emails asking me about this. His theory was that there was another planet called Planet X, and people on it were called the Anunnaki, and this planet has a 3,600 year orbit around the sun, and yet as I went searching I used to quote this man because he had some good sensible things about the Sumerians, and my research among the Sumerians agreed with his, but he said they could not have had this technology in Sumeria unless gods came from the skies. Well, I went searching to check up on what he was theorising, and it was absolutely impossible to find even one such Sumerian text. He said it was all in the Sumerian documents, and there is no such thing in all the Sumerian documents have now been made available to the world, and which they weren't when he was telling us his theories, and now it's impossible to find even one such Sumerian text. And as for this planet Nibiru, there's not one single Sumerian text that says that, and as for the 3,600 year cycle, which he says is in the Sumerian text, no such Sumerian text could be found. So now, rather than going behind the dear man's back, I decided to contact this man himself. So I wrote to Zechariah Sitchin, and I began communication with him. And he began to backpedal. And then we began to find that he could not produce the evidence that he was making so much money on. His claims of language in the past that we got our extraterrestrial theories from did not exist. So it was built on a hoax. But it's now become very popular alternative to the evolution theory. Very interesting. There is no such thing in the old writings of the past. It's a modern invention, popularised first by von Däniken and then made worldwide as an alternative to evolution by Zechariah Sitchin. And I went on to Coast to Coast FM and gave a 3-hour report on my discoveries and my contact with Sitchin. And I hope I didn't give the poor man a heart attack, but almost straight away he died. I don't want to be responsible for that, or I hope it was unrelated.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So then, in a nutshell, then your conclusion is the ancient aliens hypothesis doesn't have much going for it.
No, it doesn't. However, there's a very interesting parallel to the ancient aliens claim. These people, there are some beings who are being, they're transdimensional. They're not from another world. They're transdimensional. They can appear, and they appear in UFOs. People today are being abducted by them. Millions of people worldwide are claiming to have been abducted. And the interesting thing is that when you compare the claims made by these abductors, they're identical to the claims made by spiritists who claim that they worship Lucifer. Now, the Luciferian claims are identical to the UFO claims. The things that they preach and teach, the medical results upon the people that are abducted or who are in communication with them in seances, they match. There's so many things. In fact, my grandfather, on my father's side, was one of Australia's leading spiritists. And for many years, he was also a medical doctor, but for many years he ran seances communicating with these transdimensional beings in the Sydney Town Hall. He had audiences of up to 3,000 people attending those seances. And I can tell you a lot. I have inside information that's been in my family. And the spiritualist phenomenon is identical to the claimed UFO phenomenon. There's virtually no difference.
Wow.
but one is posing as the other.
So what are some of these parallels?
All right, that's a very interesting subject. We could spend hours on this one, but I do believe that it's worth going into to a small degree anyway at this moment now. And the mind programming is virtually the same. The medical results is the same. Okay, let's go into some of this. If you compare the spiritists with the UFO people, what you've got is this. First of all, both groups are more powerful than we are. They both have the same message to give. They can both take human form and go in and out of the dimension, and they both get angry about the same things. They both say that they're fellow servants of ours, and they both say that they're coming with bad news, and they can both actually appear often as reptiles. They can appear as they say to us that they are here to help us. They both say that we can be as gods. They both give identical predictions. They both can talk about secrets in your life that you thought nobody else knew about. And they both can possess people so that they become, as it were, go into fits. They can both speak sometimes through trance mediums. They both do the same things.
Right.
And they basically are the same group. And they both claim to be from outer space.
Okay. So then the conclusion is that the beings from the Luciferian doctrine are interpretations of these interdimensional beings.
That is right.
Okay.
Yes, like that.
That's very interesting. So before we get wrapped up today, I just wanted to talk about one of the books you wrote. You've written books on lost ancient tribes of giant human beings that walked the earth in prehistoric times. Could you go into detail about the subject matter of these books and the evidence for this claim?
Very good. Well, now, it's an interesting thing that the world before the Great Cosmic Disaster, which is known worldwide in the legends of the world as the Great Flood, the climate was very pleasant from pole to pole. There were no ice, North Pole, South Pole climate. There was a canopy, a protective canopy around the Earth which shielded out harmful cosmic rays that can shorten life and stunt life. They also kept the Earth like a terrarium inside, where everything grew so big and so easy. And of course, the fertility of the soil had not been washed out by the Great Flood, which came later and sifted right through the continental mass and then got the oceans more salty. This all happened during the flood. So the conditions before the Great Flood were much more conducive to longer living and to greater size. And as we go into coal mines, which are the forests that were destroyed at that time, we see that trees could grow up to 1,000 feet high. The remains are now found. Today, the highest trees are only in the 300s. So the trees were 3 times higher. Men were much bigger. Animals were much bigger. Kangaroos were as big as hippopotami. Sheep were as big as horses. Human beings were bigger too. So gigantism, as we call it today, was normal for that day. We'd be called pygmies if they looked down on us now. So it was a normal thing. However, in the settling down process after the Great Flood, mankind's longevity began to decrease. And that's recorded not just in the biblical record, but in the history of China, for example, where an emperor asked for an investigation to be made by his scientists as to why it was that now they're only living about about 1/10 of what they used to live a few hundred years earlier. So we can see that there is a human memory of ancient times when people were much bigger and when they were much longer lived. In other words, life was easier. Today, we've got the nourishment has been washed into the seas and our soils are impoverished. Today, we have the cosmic rays coming in which shorten life. Today, we have the ice at the poles. Everything has changed in relation to the elements that can produce longer life and larger life. So today we're living in so much of a wreck of a world compared with what it used to be in the beginning. There's the historical background for it. Now, today we're finding, my wife comes from the South Pacific island in the middle of the Pacific called Rotuma, and on my visits there, I've been shown the graves, and I've got photographs of them, of graves of men 12 foot tall. And today they're running out of burial space on the little island, and so they open up these graves and put little 5-6 foot people on top of the skeletons of the 12 foot people. This is something that occurred slowly. It took several hundred years. The giants were still after the flood for a long time, and in some areas the diminishing process took longer than others. In other places, the diminishing took only a short time. This goes on the record because history has recorded it, that for a few hundred years people were still bigger and they were still living longer, and it gradually decreased and settled down to what it is today, although it's, with science's help, it's gradually slightly increased. But there are still a few areas in the world where conditions exist where it's still possible to live longer, not as long, but live longer, and also to be much bigger than the average person is in the general world as a whole. So it's a thing that applies to humans, to plant life, and to animal life.
Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show with us today.
Well, Jake, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, come back on the show anytime.
Thank you.